Did you ever have to pretend everything was fine when it really wasn't?
Christmas that year came with a kind of bitter Midwest wind that slaps you the second you step outside, but nothing cut quite as sharply as what my brother said after dinner. We were all sitting around my mother's big oak table, the one she refinished herself back in the 90s, back when family dinners still meant something. The kids were upstairs, screaming over a Nintendo, and the grown-ups were on their third glass of wine, feeling bold and nostalgic. The fireplace crackled like it always did, same damn garland she's been putting up for 20 years, and I swear for a moment, I almost felt like I belonged there. But that illusion lasted maybe 30 seconds before Todd, my older brother, the golden child, the charmer with the mortgage he doesn't pay, and the kids in private school that he can't afford, stood up, tapped his fork against his glass like some kind of budget wedding toast, and said, loud enough for the whole room to freeze, just so we're all clear, I didn't invite my sister this year. Mom insisted. But I've got a rule, losers don't belong here. The room went silent. Dead. You could hear the heat kick on and the faint beeping of the dishwasher in the next room. I don't think anyone breathed for 5 full seconds. And me? I didn't move. Didn't flinch. I just stared at him. I didn't even bother pretending to smile or laugh it off, because somewhere in me, in that part one keeps so tightly sealed, something broke. Not cracked. Broke. Clean. Final. Now, here's the part you won't believe unless you've lived it. Nobody said anything. Not my mom. Not his wife Dana. Not even our cousin Laura, who's usually the first to call out bullshit at any table. They just sat there. Let the joke die in the air. And then, like some unspoken spell, they went back to eating pecan pie like he hadn't just sucker punched me in front of every relative with a pulse. I excused myself 10 minutes later, told Mom I had work in the morning, even though I didn't. Walked out into the freezing wind without my coat zipped up, keys shaking in my hand, eyes dry but chest hollow like a kicked-in wall. I got in the car, turned the heat up, and sat in the driveway for 15 minutes, just trying to process what the hell had just happened. Now here's what Todd didn't mention, probably because it would have ruined the punchline. That big, cozy house he lives in? The one with the oversized wreath on the door and the gourmet coffee station Dana loves showing off on Instagram? I've been covering that mortgage for 7 years. Every month. Quietly. Reliably. Automatically. Because when Todd lost his job back in 2016 and called me sobbing that they were going to lose the house, that the kids would be on the street, that Dana was threatening to move back in with her mother in Nebraska, I stepped in. No big family announcement. No favors asked in return. Just a promise. I'll cover the payments until you get back on your feet. Spoiler, he never did. The private school their kids go to? Covered that too. Tuition, books, even the iPads they needed last year for some digital learning program. Dana's car? Her cute little white crossover with the heated seats and the Bluetooth stereo she couldn't live without? Financed through me. Quietly. Monthly. Automatically. It was always just for now, just until things get better, just until the next promotion comes through. But funny thing about just until, it turns into always real quick when you're dealing with someone who never plans to pay you back. And I didn't mind, not really. I mean, I make good money. I don't have kids, don't have a husband draining my account on power tools he never uses. I figured if I can help the people I love stay afloat, why wouldn't I? But sitting in that car, hands frozen around the steering wheel, his words bouncing around my head like a ricochet bullet, losers don't belong here, I realized something I should have figured out years ago. They don't love me. They love my money. My silence. My predictability. My ability to make their life smoother without ever asking for credit. I was never family to them, I was a damn utility. An ATM with a polite smile and no overdraft fees. And that's when I did something I'd never done before. I opened my banking app. Not out of panic or some emotional fit, but with cold, deliberate calm. My finger hovered over the first auto payment, Todd's mortgage. Due January 5th. I canceled it. Then came the school tuition. Gone. Dana's insurance premiums. Gone. Every last thread they'd been pulling for years I cut. No announcements. No tantrums. No explanations. Just silence. The The same silence they offered me when my own brother stood up at Christmas and told the room I didn't belong there. So fine. I don't belong? Then I'll make sure they feel my absence in the only way they ever really saw me, in their bank balance. Let me ask you something and be honest. If your own brother humiliated you in front of your family, called you a loser, knowing full damn well he's been living off your paychecks for the better part of a decade, would you still pay his bills? Would you smile and keep the peace for the sake of the kids? Or would you sit back and let the whole house of cards collapse, knowing you could have saved them but choosing finally not to? Because me? I'm not proud of it. I didn't do it to be cruel. But sometimes the only way people learn is when the lights go off, the water gets shut down, and the school calls to say, "Sorry, but your tuition payment bounced." That was the day I stopped being their safety net. And the funny thing is, they still don't know it yet. But they will. Oh, they will. And when it starts, I won't even have to raise my voice. I'll just sit back and watch it all fall. Because the thing about being the family's loser is, sometimes, we're just the only ones too tired to keep pretending. There's a kind of pleasure that doesn't feel like joy and doesn't come with any celebration. It's not loud, it's not wild, it doesn't come with clapping or champagne, and most of the time, you don't even want to admit it's there, but it's real. And it sits with you like a warm weight in your chest, the kind of pleasure that comes from doing exactly what needs to be done without needing anyone to see you do it. That was what I felt in the days after Christmas, when the silence stretched across the phone lines like some invisible wire between me and the rest of the family, and nobody called to ask how I was or what I thought about what Todd said, and for once, I didn't rush to explain myself or make anyone feel more comfortable than they deserved. I just sat with it. I let the air stay still. It started, not with some dramatic crash, but with a quiet little ping, an email from the mortgage company, notifying me that autopay had been successfully canceled. No, are you sure? No final warning. Just a simple confirmation that the rope had been cut. And I looked at that email the same way you look at an ex you finally stopped missing, not with bitterness, but with the kind of clarity that tells you, oh, I should have done this a long time ago. The next one came 2 hours later, from the private school's billing department. The deadline for spring semester tuition was approaching, and their system was reminding me that my linked card was about to be charged. I clicked the link, logged in, and removed my payment method like I was deleting some ancient email account I didn't need anymore. No drama. No guilt. Just a quiet kind of resolve that felt like putting down a bag I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten what it was like to walk without the weight. By New Year's Day, I had cut off everything, the automatic deposits to their utilities, the insurance premiums Dana had been too proud to admit she couldn't afford, the backup savings account I'd set up in their name when they were trying for their second kid and didn't have enough to cover the hospital bills. Every single line of invisible support I'd been offering them like some behind-the-scenes stagehand keeping their life running smoothly, I severed. And I didn't tell anyone. Not because I wanted to play some secret revenge game, but because I needed, for the first time in years, to see what they looked like without my help. I needed to watch the machine function without my hand cranking the wheel. The first call came on January 10th, just before noon. It was from the school's front office, a polite woman named Jean who'd spoken to me countless times over the years, always in that same chipper, overly formal tone. She was just confirming whether there'd been a change in payment arrangements, since the account for both Todd's kids was now showing unpaid balances and a financial hold. I didn't lie. I didn't pretend. I just said, clearly and with zero hesitation, yes, there has been a change. I'm no longer covering that. There was a pause, just long enough to hear the confusion in her breath, and then she thanked me and said she would inform the family. I hung up without another word. I knew that call would get back to Dana, and sure enough, by that evening, I had a missed call from her, followed by a voice message that started with laughter, that same brittle, strained laugh she always used when she was trying to act like nothing was wrong, and ended with a casual, just wondering if something's up with the school payments, maybe a glitch on their end. I didn't call her back. I didn't explain. I didn't offer a soft landing. Instead, I sent a text, 7 words long, no glitch. I'm done. Handle it yourselves. The messages came slower after that. A few days of silence. Then another email from the mortgage lender, this one addressed to Todd, copied to me, requesting immediate payment for the missed January installment. I didn't reply. Not my circus anymore. I imagine Todd probably saw that email while sitting in the kitchen I furnished, in a house with plumbing I paid to fix last winter, surrounded by furniture bought with a credit card I added him to without ever asking for repayment. And I wonder what went through his head when he realized I wasn't just taking a break or acting emotional, that I was serious, that the train had stopped running, and he had no idea how to push it forward on his own. You know what's funny? For years, every time Todd needed help, he'd come to me with the same words, "I hate asking, but you're the only one I can trust." And I'd nod, and I'd wire the money, and I'd tell myself I was being the bigger person. But trust, it turns out, doesn't mean a damn thing if it only flows one way. Because the truth is, he never trusted me with his honesty, with his respect, or with the basic decency of treating me like someone whose presence mattered outside of my wallet. What he really meant was, "I hate asking, but I love that you say yes." By the end of January, the water had been shut off once, just long enough for Dana to post some cryptic story on Instagram about hard times revealing true people, which I couldn't help but laugh at. And the school had sent a formal withdrawal warning for both kids, citing unresolved balances and no communication from the responsible party. That's when my mother called. Not because she knew what was going on, but because she could feel the ripple in the family tension, and as usual, she wanted to smooth it over without ever naming the problem. She asked if everything was all right between me and Todd. I told her, as calmly as I could, everything's fine. I'm just not paying for his life anymore. She went quiet. Not angry. Just confused. Like she honestly hadn't realized how much of their existence had been built on my invisible scaffolding. And maybe that's the most painful part, not the insult at Christmas, not the silence from the rest of the family, not even the years of being used, but the simple fact that no one noticed I was giving so much. Until I stopped. But now that the bills are piling up, and the deadlines are passing, and the safety nets are gone, they're starting to notice. And I'm just getting started. There's something almost poetic about how quietly a man unravels when the things he depends on, without ever admitting he depends on them, begin to vanish without a trace, not with fireworks or fanfare, not with a single dramatic collapse, but in slow, steady shifts that feel at first like inconvenience, and then like dread, and finally like full-blown panic. And watching Todd go through that descent, even from a distance, was like observing a man wrestle with the ghost of his own pride, too arrogant to admit he was falling and too blind to see that he had never actually been standing on his own 2 feet to begin with. The first signs came not from him directly, of course, because that would have required honesty, or at the very least, a sliver of humility, but from the ripples he left in everyone else's conversations. The strange way family members began speaking about him in more hushed tones, the careful pauses in text messages from our mother, the abrupt end to Dana's usual curated social media updates that always portrayed their home life as pristine and cheerful, complete with matching pajamas and homemade sourdough, like their entire reality was held together with filtered lighting and 2 sponsored coupon codes. The first real proof that he had started noticing what I had done came when Laura, our cousin with a no-nonsense voice and zero tolerance for pretension, called me one evening out of the blue, not to gossip, not to interrogate, but with a simple, knowing question. "Did something happen between you and Todd? Because he's acting like someone kicked the legs out from under his chair and he's too proud to admit he's sitting on the floor." I didn't give her details. I didn't open the floodgates. I simply said, I stopped doing things I shouldn't have had to do in the first place, and left it at that, and to her credit, she didn't push. There was a long pause on the line, the kind that stretches heavy with realization, and then she said something I hadn't expected, something that stuck with me long after we hung up. "I think we all knew you were carrying more than you should have. We just didn't say anything because, well, you made it look easy." But of course, that's the thing about making hard things look easy. It gives people permission to pretend there's no burden at all. Todd didn't come to me immediately, not even when the letters from the school started arriving in triplicate, not when the utilities stopped accepting late fees and started talking about disconnection. Not even when Dana's face started slipping from fake polish to tight-lipped exhaustion in every forced family photo. He tried, instead, to fix it the only way he knew how, by manipulating everyone around him into fixing it for him. First came the subtle guilt trips in the family group chat. Can't believe how fast bills pile up after the holidays. Anyone else drowning? Followed by those winking emojis that make everything feel like a joke even when it's not. Then came the comments about how hard it is being a parent these days, about how people without kids just don't get the pressure, which was clearly aimed at me, the childless sister who had, up until recently, been paying for his children's education in full. What he didn't realize was that his desperation wasn't invisible anymore. It was seeping into everything he touched, and the more he tried to twist the narrative, the more transparent his mask became. When he posted a photo of their fireplace with a caption about keeping the family warm, no matter what, I knew the gas had been shut off. When Dana posted a story about their homemade date night featuring boxed macaroni and candles, I knew the credit cards weren't working. And when my mother called me again, not because she had put the pieces together, but because Todd had finally started whispering half-truths in her ear, I knew he had officially begun what I call the sympathy phase, where the villain doesn't confess, but instead rewrites the story so that everyone forgets who struck first. She asked me softly, tentatively, if I could maybe be the bigger person and help them out just until they catch their breath. She didn't mention money directly, but she didn't have to. I could hear it in her tone, that familiar maternal pleading that's less about understanding and more about smoothing over the cracks, so she doesn't have to watch the people she loves fight like strangers. And when I asked her, "Did Todd tell you why they're struggling?" there was a pause, a flicker of uncertainty, before she answered, "Not exactly. Just that things are tight." I didn't explain. I didn't give her the full history. I just told her, calmly, that I had nothing more to offer, and if they were truly in crisis, then maybe it was time Todd learned how to ask with honesty, not entitlement. And then it happened. The message I knew was coming but still felt strange to read. A voice memo. Todd's voice, low, drawn out, laced with the kind of panic that's wrapped in fake calm. "Hey, I'm not trying to make a thing out of this, but we're kinda stuck here. Dana's furious. The school's threatening expulsion, and the mortgage company's leaving voicemails. I just don't understand what changed. You've always helped. Why now?" He ended the message with a sigh. Not an apology. Not an admission. Just a tired exhale, like I owed him some kind of closure for a favor I never agreed to make permanent. I didn't call back. I didn't even respond. I sent one sentence. I didn't change. You did. You just didn't notice until the money stopped. There's a kind of silence that follows a message like that, a thick, charged silence, not because there's nothing to say, but because the truth finally broke the spell. And from that day on, every missed call, every ignored group text, every awkward family dinner invite that left my name off the list, all of it became evidence that the illusion was crumbling, and he didn't have the skills to rebuild it without me. But I wasn't going to fix it. Not anymore. Because this time, I wasn't the one drowning in guilt or shame or silence. This time, he was. And it turns out, Todd doesn't swim very well. There's a particular shift that happens when a man who's spent his entire adult life positioning himself as the reliable hero, the charming older brother, the dependable patriarch in the making, starts to sense that the foundation beneath his image is no longer solid, when he realizes, often too late, that the scaffolding holding up his life wasn't built by him at all, but by the very people he casually disrespected, manipulated, and leaned on without a second thought, and watching Todd spiral. Through that awakening was like watching someone try to sprint across a frozen lake just as the ice beneath them begins to crack, not all at once, not with a loud crash, but with a slow, deliberate crumble that keeps them upright long enough to believe they still have control, right before they go under. The days following his voice memo, that strange, half-hearted mix of confusion, entitlement, and unspoken desperation, passed quietly at first, with the kind of eerie stillness that always comes before a storm, and I knew, in my gut, that he wasn't done. Not even close, That men like Todd never simply give up or accept consequence when they've lived their whole lives being shielded from it, that instead, they pivot, they rebrand, they soften the edges of their cruelty and try to crawl their way back to safety by draping their manipulation in faux vulnerability and performative regret. I didn't have to wait long for it to happen, because sure enough, not a week later, he showed up in person at my apartment door. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of late winter day where the cold hangs heavy in the air but the sun is pretending spring might actually be coming, and I had just poured myself a cup of coffee, barefoot, in old sweatpants, enjoying the rare quiet of a weekend with no obligations, when the knock came, not frantic, not forceful, just steady, measured, rehearsed. I opened the door and there he was, hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket, his eyes carrying that familiar weight of someone who's not sleeping well and trying hard to make it look like they're still in control. For a second, we just stood there, neither of us saying a word, until he cleared his throat and mumbled something about being in the area, which was a lie, since he lived nearly 40 minutes away and had no reason to be on my side of town unless he was here for exactly this. He stepped inside without waiting to be invited, the same way he always had, like boundaries were optional and proximity automatically meant forgiveness, and he took a long look around the apartment like he was assessing how I lived, what I had, what I wasn't struggling with, and I let him look. I sat down on the couch and waited, not offering coffee, not asking how the kids were, just giving him the space to get to whatever carefully scripted appeal he'd come to deliver. And then, like clockwork, it began. He said he knew things had gotten out of hand, that maybe he'd said things at Christmas he didn't mean, that it was all in poor taste, that he was trying to be funny, that he had no idea I'd taken it so personally, all the classic lines, soft, non-committal, designed to express regret without ever offering real accountability. I let him talk, let him fumble through his rehearsed speech, and when he finally got to the part where he said, "Look, I know you're mad, but the kids are suffering, Dana's barely holding it together, and I'm just asking for help. Not forever. Just for now," I looked him straight in the eye and asked the only question that mattered. "Did you tell them the truth?" He blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" I didn't flinch. "Did you tell Mom you've been living off me for the better part of a decade? Did you tell the school that the reason the payments stopped is because your loser sister stopped covering them? Did you tell Dana you wouldn't have that house, those cars, those private school kids, any of it, if it weren't for me?" His silence was immediate and deafening. He opened his mouth once, then again, but no words came, because we both knew the answer. He hadn't told them. Not because he was ashamed, not truly, but because he didn't want to relinquish the illusion that he was the provider, the husband, the father doing everything right in a world that kept making things unfair. He didn't want anyone to know the extent to which he'd failed, not in ambition or hard work, but in humility and gratitude. And he wasn't here to apologize. He was here to negotiate. But I wasn't negotiating anymore. "You're not here to say sorry," I said, standing up, walking slowly to the door. "You're here to get rescued without paying the cost of your own pride." But begging, I added, my hand on the knob, doesn't sound like an apology when it's laced with excuses. He stared at me, something wounded flickering behind his eyes, and for a second, just a second, I saw the kid he used to be, the brother who used to build blanket forts with me on rainy afternoons, who used to call me champ when we were playing backyard baseball, who once snuck into my room and gave me his Walkman after I had a bad day at school. But then I remembered the Christmas toast. The silence that followed. The years of invisible support that had never been acknowledged, let alone appreciated. So I opened the door. "I won't stop you from fixing it," I said quietly. "But I'm not going to fix it for you." He didn't move at first, like he was still hoping the silence would stretch into mercy, but when he finally stepped outside, he looked smaller somehow, not broken, not yet, but bent. Like the weight was finally registering and his spine wasn't sure how to carry it. He didn't look back as he walked to his car. And I didn't watch him drive away. Because the truth is, that wasn't the end. That was just the first time he realized the door he'd always assumed would be open for him, forever and without condition, might not be so easy to walk back through this time. And for the first time in a very long time, I was okay with that. There's something peculiar about watching people come to terms with consequences they've spent their whole lives avoiding, something both painful and deeply clarifying, because once the curtain is pulled back and they are forced to look, not at the version of their life they projected, but at the bare, unfiltered truth of what they actually built, what they relied on, what they took for granted, you begin to understand just how fragile certain egos are when they're no longer propped up by someone else's silence. And Todd, in the months that followed that final conversation on my doorstep, unraveled not with a bang, but with the slow erosion of a man forced to face himself without a scapegoat in sight. It didn't happen all at once, of course. Men like my brother never shatter outright. They crack in pieces, gradually, sometimes with dignity, but more often with excuses, petty reassignments of blame, and quiet desperation disguised as stoicism. The first I heard of his official downfall, if that's even the right word for it, came not through him, not even through Dana, but through my mother, who called me one Wednesday afternoon with a carefully measured tone that always signaled some family update laced with emotional landmines. She told me, in the kind of half-concerned, half-scolding way she always used when Todd was involved, that they had sold the house, or rather, that they were forced to let it go, something about a refinancing plan falling through, the mortgage becoming unmanageable, and the bank no longer willing to extend grace. She didn't ask outright whether this was my doing, but it lingered in her voice, in the way she paused after certain phrases, hoping I might offer an explanation, a justification, anything that would allow her to make peace with the version of events she had begun to suspect, but didn't want to fully believe. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I simply said, "That sounds difficult," and left it at that, because there's a certain line you stop crossing when you realize you've spent your whole life cushioning people from truths they were perfectly capable of learning on their own. And I was no longer interested in being the translator for a language Todd had spoken fluently his entire life, the language of manipulation, avoidance, and carefully crafted narratives. By the end of that month, Todd had moved with Dana and the kids into a smaller rental on the edge of town, a nondescript two-bedroom that lacked the charm and polish of their old place, where the grass in the front yard wasn't manicured by a service I used to pay for, and the windows didn't gleam with the soft lighting of curated Instagram content. Dana deleted most of her social media accounts, not because she had suddenly found humility, but because without the illusion of status, there was nothing left to post. The kids were withdrawn from their private school and placed into the local public district, where, I'm told, they struggled for the first few months to adjust, not academically, but socially, because the world they had been raised in had vanished overnight, and no one had warned them it wasn't real to begin with. The family, for their part, split themselves into two quiet factions. One side, mostly made up of the cousins and siblings who had always looked at Todd with a mixture of admiration and envy, began to whisper about how cruel I had been, how I had let children suffer to make a point, how I had weaponized money and pride in a way that felt cold, calculating, and unnecessary. The other side, smaller, quieter, less vocal but more honest, simply said things like, "She did what needed to be done," or "It's not her job to keep bailing him out," or, in Lara's case, "Maybe it's time someone showed Todd what rock bottom feels like when your sister's not there to catch you." And through it all, I said nothing. I responded to no accusations. I answered no vague questions posed through third parties. I simply lived my life, the life I had built for myself, without borrowed money, without lies, without needing someone else to play savior while I played victim. And the silence, eventually, became its own kind of peace. But Todd wasn't done. Because people like Todd rarely are. There came a day, late in the spring, when I received a letter, not a text, not a voicemail, not a cryptic email, but an actual handwritten letter delivered to my mailbox, the kind of gesture that feels dramatic in its antiquity, as though sincerity requires pen and ink to be believable again. The envelope was plain. No return address. Just my name, written in his handwriting, the same looping, cocky scrawl he used to sign birthday cards with back when we were kids. I stared at it for a while before opening it, half expecting some final plea, some manipulative twist wrapped in faux remorse, But what I read instead was different. It was an apology. A real one. Not perfectly worded, not overly emotional, but honest in a way I hadn't expected. He admitted to the years of taking without thinking. He acknowledged the Christmas dinner, the shame of it, the memory of my face when the words "loser" left his mouth and no one spoke up. He described the unraveling of his marriage, not in blame, but in recognition that Dana had carried more than her share, and that somewhere along the line, he had started believing his own lie, that he was owed help, that family meant free forgiveness, and that I, of all people, would never leave him to clean up the mess alone. He didn't ask for money. He didn't beg for restoration. He just said, "I understand now. And I'm sorry." I read the letter twice, folded it neatly, placed it in the drawer beside my bed. And then I went to the window, looked out over the quiet street, the late-blooming trees lining the sidewalk, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not triumph, not vindication, but something softer, stranger. I felt done. Not angry. Not vindictive. Just done. I didn't write back. I didn't call. I didn't send a message through our mother or leave a door open through implication. Because the truth is, forgiveness isn't always a door you walk through hand in hand with the person who hurt you. Sometimes it's the door you close behind you so gently, so permanently, that the sound doesn't even echo. But if anyone ever asks, I'll tell them the truth, just as plainly as I know it now, the door is still open. Just not for him. At least not yet.